Well, good morning, church. Good morning. Hey, if you have a Bible with you, open it up to Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. If you don't have a physical Bible with you, open up your phone, find it in the app. Better yet, open the Christ Community Church app. All of our passages for today are in there. There's also some questions for when I go long and you get bored. It'll help you stay engaged with what's going on. I know. I'm aware. I got to hang out with some of our high school students on Friday, and they even were aware that out of Chad and myself, I am the long-winded one, and yet I only spoke for like 8 minutes, 10 minutes. It was great. All right. While you find Matthew chapter 4, I actually want to start at the other end of the Bible on page 1 in the book of Genesis. One of my core beliefs around the Bible and how you and I can best understand it is that Genesis 1 through 12 is designed to help you understand the need for the rest of Scripture. Why does the world need Jesus? Well, Genesis tells you why. Because of the fall, Genesis 3. Why does Revelation end with a restored heaven and earth? And why does it look so much like a garden? Well, Genesis tells you it actually all started in a garden. It's returning to a garden. Why are people so messed up? Why is relationship so hard? Who made all of this? And what does he want with me? And Genesis tells you all of that. It sets up the story of Scripture. In some ways, Genesis 1 through, I believe, the beginning of 12 is kind of a prologue that's set up and help you make sense of the rest of God's word and why the world is the way that it is. And this is really important because if nobody's ever told you this, the world, as it stands today, is not the way it's meant to be. I don't know if that surprises you at all. See, some of us come from traditions where the Bible effectively starts in Genesis 3 with the fall, to where everything's just broken, and that's all we ever hear about is how broken the world is and how broken we are, and that's why we need Jesus and all the judgment and things that are going to come at the end. But the Bible doesn't start in Genesis 3. It starts in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created. God, acting of his own accord, Father, Son, and Spirit, makes the cosmos. And how did God describe what he made? He didn't say it was broken. He said it was good. In Hebrew, the word there is tov. It means good or beautiful or perfect or as intended. I love that. God makes everything, and it is as he intended it to be. What's good? Light, land, plants, the sun and the moon, sea creatures, birds, land animals, all he makes is tov, is good. In fact, that word tov is used 7 times in Genesis 1. 7 being a word that also signifies this perfection, this intention, this things are as they should be. God, at the end of Genesis 1, is batting 1,000 on creation. Everything he makes is how it's supposed to be. And you would expect, if you know the story of Scripture and kind of the overarching narrative, that it wouldn't be till Genesis 3 when we find out that something isn't as it's intended to be. But in fact, in Genesis 2, right in the middle of the chapter, verse 18, it says this: "The Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone." The first thing, the very first thing that God declares not good is what? Loneliness. Humanity's aloneness. Let that sink in for a second. Before the fall, before sin, God says that your aloneness is not good. This may be one of the most important things God says to you and me. It is not good for you to be alone. And yet loneliness is the pathology of our modern age. Mother Teresa said that loneliness is a leprosy of the modern world. The Surgeon General Vivek Murthy once said that loneliness is an epidemic. George Gallup of Gallup poll fame said that Americans are the loneliest people in the entire world. Loneliness, according to Justin Earley, is a sickness that you and I cannot see, which is what makes it so dangerous. See, most of us who are wrestling with loneliness wouldn't even be able to diagnose it. Think about that. You might be lonely right now and you wouldn't even know it. It's always the undiagnosed illnesses that wreak the worst havoc on us. Loneliness comes from so many places in this world. It comes from losing a loved one. It comes from moving away. It comes from changing churches or seeing a small group dissolve. It comes from being excluded or breaking up with someone. It comes from divorce or being hurt by someone. But it also comes from places we don't usually expect. Loneliness comes when you're surrounded by everyone but feel known by no one. Or when you find a community but you don't actually have the time to be a part of it. Or you have close friends, but all of them live far away. Or you feel misunderstood by your family. Or the isolation you feel when you're going through something really, really difficult and nobody around you seems to understand it. Here's Justin Early again. He says this: loneliness, this is the new normal of modern life. We're the most physically connected and yet spiritually isolated people who have ever walked the planet. Our default perspective should now be to assume that if you are a modern American, you are lonely. Loneliness kills us body and soul. Why? Because it's the opposite of what we're made for. It is not good for you to be alone. See, we were created for connection with God and with each other. That's the design. And when we ignore that design, it doesn't just affect our emotional health or even our physical health, it does damage to our soul. Because at its core, loneliness is a spiritual problem. So how do we respond? How do we resist the cultural drift toward isolation? How do we push back against the epidemic of loneliness? The answer isn't complicated, but it's costly. See, the way of Jesus offers us a practice, a way of life that directly counters the fragmentation of our world. And it's the practice of biblical community, not just being friendly, not just coming to church, but sharing life together in the way Jesus invites us to. And so for the next 10 weeks, we're going to talk about what this looks like. We're going to explore what it means to live in true community, not just as a group of acquaintances or somebody you shake hands with when you come in on the way to church, not just people who sit near each other in the same spot every Sunday. I do the same thing. No judgment, just saying. But a family of people committed to following Jesus together. So if you have Matthew 4, some of you are like, are we ever going to get to the Bible? Yes. If you have Matthew 4 open, I want to walk through 5 or 6 stories from the life of Jesus today. And I want you to look and think about what kind of people does Jesus invite into community? What kind of life does he invite them into? What can we learn from the kind of community that Jesus might be calling us into today? Because if we're going to talk about community and what we should be doing and how we should live in biblical community, we should probably understand how Jesus talks about and creates community. So Matthew 4, if you have it open, verse 18, we'll start there. Here's what it says. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you to fish for people. At once they left their nets and they followed him. Going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, his brother John. They were in a boat with their father, preparing their nets, and Jesus called them. And immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Very early on in the Gospels, you start to pick up that to follow Jesus means that you are in community with other people. Jesus does not call a single disciple, he calls disciples plural. And Jesus continues on throughout Matthew calling more disciples to follow him, but you'll notice that there's a very high bar of entry. There is a cost to being a part of Jesus' community. If you flip a couple pages to Matthew chapter 8, we'll pick up in verse 18. It's also on the screen. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. And a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." In other words, I don't know if you've noticed this, you want to follow me, I'm pretty much homeless. Like, I couch surf most of the time. In fact, you'll notice I usually invite myself over to dinner at other people's houses. The very next story we're going to read, Jesus is at dinner at Matthew, the disciples' house. So if you want to follow me, you should recognize that if I don't have a place to lay my head as the Son of Man, or Son of God, or Son of Man, then my disciples won't either. There's a cost to following me. Verse 21, another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." Now, Jesus isn't being calloused here. He's not saying like, "Hey, I know your father died, but like just leave him, he's fine." Like, what it's actually saying is, a lot of scholars believe that first let me go and bury my father is actually a first century kind of word picture. It kind of means let me go home and wait for my father to die before I come and follow you. And the reason for that is it's a taboo in that culture for you to leave your family, especially as a son, to leave your family and just go off and do your own thing. That's very to the culture at that time. It's why the story of the prodigal son is so interesting, because the son does something that you should never do in that culture. So he's essentially saying, "Hey, look, Jesus, you just said that you're pretty much homeless. I heard you talking to that religious leader. You said that you don't have a place to lay your head. my father, hopefully he's going to die soon, is my hope. So let me go home. Let me be a good son. Let me wait for him to die. I'm going to get my inheritance. I'll come back and follow you. We'll have some money, and then we can at least afford some pillows and things like that. It'll be much nicer. When things get more comfortable, Jesus, I will come and follow you. And the story doesn't tell you what happens next. It doesn't say what those disciples or potential disciples do. Did they follow? Did they walk away? Matthew's trying to get you to ask a question. Are you one of the people who's willing to give up everything to be part of the Jesus community? Or are you somebody who the cost is just too high? Flip a page, Matthew 9, verse 9. It says this, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. If you are a sinner and a tax collector, who are your friends? Sinners and other tax collectors, right? Makes sense. On hearing this, Jesus said, while he was doing this, the Pharisees saw this and they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. It's a quote from Hosea, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Matthew begins to tell us that there's a wide spectrum of spiritual maturity in this Jesus community. You have good Torah-abiding Jewish boys who were in the boat with their father, Peter, James, John, and you have tax collectors and sinners, and we're going to learn in just a moment, you have Judas Iscariot who will betray him. Apparently, in the Jesus community, Jesus is more interested in your level of commitment to him than your spiritual maturity. Jesus is more concerned about how committed you are to him than how far along you are in the spiritual journey. Flip a page or look to the next page, chapter 10, verse 1. Jesus called his 12 disciples to him, and he gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles: Simon, who's called Peter, his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. It's easy to miss this in our context, but this is a weird group of people. Like a really strange group of people. There's this mishmash of personalities and backgrounds and worldviews, and notice there's two people who have labels next to their names. You have Matthew, the tax collector, and you have Simon, the zealot. Matthew, the tax collector, works for the Roman government. He collects taxes from his people and gives them to the empire, the oppressor, the enemy. He is on the Roman payroll. Simon, the zealot, is part of a political movement that's deeply opposed to Rome and their rule. And many of the zealots believed that the only correct response to these oppressors was violence, was guerrilla-like warfare, that was how you should respond to Roman oppression. So think about that. You have a traitor on this side of the small group, and you have a murderer on this side. They could not be more different. Imagine, don't say any names out loud when I ask this question. Imagine the most left-wing, progressive personality you can think of, and then imagine the most right-wing, MAGA, conservative personality you can think of, and then imagine they're in the same small group together. Some of you are like, I've been in that small group. I know, we talked about it. Imagine the tension there. Imagine what that must be like. And no joke, take that tension that you can imagine would be there, multiply it by a factor of 10. That's the tension between a tax collector and a zealot in the first century. And that's just one example from this group. There are certainly more. It's not a perfect group of people. There's a lot of differences. Flip a few pages. This is our last story, Matthew chapter 20, last passage. Verse 20. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down asked a favor of him. What is it you want, he asked. She said, grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at the left in your kingdom. So notice that mom is doing all the talking. Mom is the one acting here primarily. And she asked, hey, Jesus, when your kingdom comes, when you take over, when you kick the Romans out, could you make one of my sons your vice president and your secretary of state? Put them in power when you start to rule. Kind of an interesting thing to ask. Jesus says this, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? When Jesus talks about the cup, it's often he's alluding to the suffering that he will endure, but also that others will endure who follow him. We can, they answered. They are so ignorant of what's going to happen. Jesus said, you will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared by my Father. When the 10 heard about this, so notice, this has happened away from the rest of the disciples. Mommy and James and John have gone away and they found Jesus by himself, and they're talking to him, hey, Jesus, can you put my sons in power? And then the 10 find out about it. And what does it say? It says, when they find out, they were indignant. Indignant is Bible for really, really, really ticked off. And Jesus calls them together, all 12 of them. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them, but not so with you. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Notice that for Jesus, the way of the world, the way of the Gentiles, how they do relationship, power, status, control, is not the way his community will work. Not so with you, he says. In the community Jesus is building, greatness looks like service, influence looks like sacrifice, leadership looks like laying your life down. It's an invitation to a countercultural community where love for God and for one another is at the center of everything they do. Jesus doesn't use that word love here, but that's the idea he's getting at, that this community he's building is the place where his disciples, his followers, are formed into people of love, people of peace, people who lay down their lives for one another. One scholar calls community the crucible of our discipleship. A crucible, a container that's used to heat things up to extremely high temperatures, to melt down what's impure, to separate what's valuable, to forge something better. That is what this Jesus community is meant to do. What we see in the life of Jesus and what we're going to talk about over the next 10 weeks in the writings of Paul and the examples of the early church is that community is at the very center of our formation into people who look more and more like Jesus. In fact, I would argue that out of all the spiritual disciplines we do, the practices that open us up and make us available to the transforming power of the Holy Spirit, I believe biblical community may be one of, if not the most important things you and I engage in. And so with the rest of our time today, I want to just outline a few observations and reflections from what we just read and what it might mean for us right now as people who want to follow Jesus. So I got 5 points. We'll start with the most obvious. Community is non-optional for discipleship to Jesus. There's a study done a couple years ago. It's where they asked people like, hey, how do you like to follow Jesus? Do you like to listen to podcasts, go to church, sing worship songs, be in a small group? You know what 38% of people said? I like to follow Jesus by myself. Which as an introvert sounds great. I'd love that. Just me and a podcast, me and a good book. No people. I love you guys, okay? Don't get me wrong. I really do. I'm an introvert, right? No community? Like that sounds so much easier. But do you understand how odd that idea is to Jesus? Jesus did not call one disciple, he called disciples plural. You cannot separate discipleship to Jesus from involvement in his community. The Catholic spiritual director Ronald Rolheiser puts it this way: part of the very essence of Christianity, is to be together in a concrete community, a real community, not an online community, a real community. Spirituality, that's his word for discipleship, for a Christian, can never be an individualistic quest. The God of the incarnation, the God who came down to earth in the form of Jesus of Nazareth, tells us that anyone who says he or she loves an invisible God up in heaven, but is unwilling to deal with a visible neighbor on earth, is a liar. No one can love a God who cannot be seen if he or she cannot love a God or a neighbor who can be seen. So Christian spirituality, discipleship, is always as much about dealing with each other as it is about dealing with God. Community is non-optional for your discipleship. Second, community is non-optional for a well-lived life. It's not just about following Jesus, it's about human flourishing. The truth is, we don't just need community to follow Jesus, we need community to be human to be whole. We are designed for connection. Part of your humanity is your need for connection to other humans. And to be disconnected, to be isolated, is inhumane. It is against your humanity. That's what Genesis 2:18 tells us. It is not good for you to be alone. Richard Plass and James Cofield in their book, The Relational Soul, write this. One of my favorite quotes, I've shared this here before. At the core of our being is this very truth. We are designed for and we are defined by our relationships. We are born with a relentless longing to participate in the lives of others. Fundamentally, we are relational souls. We cannot be relational. We cannot exist well without connection and communion with each other. I don't care how introverted you are, you need community. You are a relational soul. I don't care how busy you are, you need people who know you, see you, walk with you. It doesn't matter how successful you are. You can have the dream job, the perfect house, the latest car. But if one relationship in your life that's really close to you is off, you will feel it. Emotionally, you will be unsettled. Spiritually, you will be all out of sync because all of it is connected. You are a relational soul. Third, community is the context where we're transformed. You and I become like the people we hang out with. As the saying goes, show me your friends and I will show you your future. Spend enough time with people and their habits, hopes, and hang-ups start to rub off on you and become your habits, hopes, and hang-ups. Intentional relationships with other people following the way of Jesus shapes us in two different ways. It exposes us and it encourages us. Community exposes what's inside of you. Think of the passage we just read about James and John and mommy, right? There's selfishness, there's greed, there's pride. All of it was in James and John when they were in the boat with their father. But it was when they sat at a table with the 12 and they went through life with Jesus and others that it came out into the open to where it could be dealt with. Or Peter's anger problem existed long before he drew a sword at Gethsemane and cut somebody's ear off. But that anger wouldn't have come to the surface had he stayed in the boat. It's when he started following Jesus that it came out and could be dealt with. See, community exposes what's inside of you, what Pete Scazzaro calls your shadow side. Here's how he describes your shadow side. Your shadow side is the accumulation of untamed emotions, less than pure motives, and thoughts that, while largely unconscious, strongly influence and shape your behaviors. There's a lot of stuff going on inside of you. Your personality, ways of thinking, mental maps you've taken from childhood or the way you've lived your life that you don't ever even think about. You just do it. And it is the damaged but mostly hidden version of who you are. We all have a shadow side. The thing is, though, is that your shadow side is mostly hidden from you more than anyone else. A lot of us are blind to our shadow side until we step into a community with somebody. That could be a marriage, it can be a deep friendship, it can be a dating relationship, it can be a tight-knit group of people following Jesus, but you step into a committed relationship with others, into community, and it's like somebody holds up a mirror in front of you. And all of a sudden, they start to reflect back at you your anger, your passive aggressiveness, and your dislike of conflict, and your unwillingness to deal with hard things. And all of that starts to come out within this communal relationship. Jeff Vanderstelt's a pastor up in the Seattle area of Washington. He tells a story of his community and how there's a woman in his community who comes one week to their group, and she starts to share about how things have been going at work. She's frustrated. She's angry because she feels like she should have gotten a promotion. She's been passed over again, and she feels like she deserves this. And he says that the people in his group lovingly, because they know her, start to ask questions. Why do you think you deserve that? Why does that make you so angry? What's going on inside of you? What do you think God might be trying to teach you through this? And she talks about how she realizes that there was a lot of pride in her. She felt like she deserved it. She wanted the recognition for the work she'd done. But that would have never come out if she didn't live in community of people who were willing to say, hey, there's something going on here. You're acting in a way that's not the way Jesus would want you to. Let's talk about it. What's really happening deep within you? But if community only ever exposed what's going on inside of us or what is wrong with us, that would be pretty crushing. Right? If all you ever heard were, hey, here's all the areas you need to grow in and where you're not living like Jesus yet, that would leave most of us defeated. Which is why it's so important that community in the way of Jesus doesn't just expose what's in you and going on inside of you, but it encourages you. There's this fascinating idea from the world of counseling that the only way that you truly heal from relational wounds is through relationship. Like, think about that. Like, your deepest wounds in life typically come through people. A partner, a parent, a friend, a church. And yet your greatest healing comes through people. When people have something heartbreaking happen to them and they cut themselves off and they say, I'm never gonna let anybody ever get close to me again. What they typically do is they build up an armor, they wall off their heart, and they never heal. They never get over it, because the truth is, you can't fix the broken parts of you alone. You need people who will speak truth and love over you. You need people who will challenge you when you're slipping. You need people who will stand with you when you feel like you're failing. That's what Christian community is meant to be. It's a place where your shadow side is exposed and your true self, who God intends you to be, is encouraged. Where you're challenged to grow and held up by the grace of those around you. That's the kind of community Jesus invites us into for. Community is the byproduct of commitment. But most of us would rather find a community than commit to a community. See, most of us want community to be easy, natural, effortless. We don't want to have to work for it. We want them to pursue us, not us have to pursue them. We want to walk into a room and feel seen and find our people and never have to work for it. We want community that doesn't cost too much, doesn't stretch us too far, doesn't ask anything of our schedule or our preferences or our comfort or autonomy or individualism. And if that community gets hard, what do? We tend to leave. We go somewhere else. We convince ourselves that real community is still out there somewhere. This community, whatever it was, a relationship, a church, a small group, must not be it. But underneath that sort of searching and thinking is a consumer mindset. See, we treat community like a product, like something we're entitled to receive, not responsible to help build. We treat community like something we are entitled to receive, but not responsible to build. That's why phrases like church shopping exist. And if you've used that phrase, no shame. Somebody used it last week, no shame. Like, I get it, I've said it before too. But have you ever thought about what that word means, church, or that phrase, church shopping? Like, shopping is something we do when we're looking for better fitting clothes, or you want a car that's more reliable, or a phone with more features. We shop for a church the way that we shop for a mattress, supportive, not too firm, something we can lie on once a week and still feel good the next day on Monday morning. And what happens when it doesn't work out? You return it. What happens when a store raises its prices or it comes under new management? The shoppers leave. The same is true for church shopping. When the cost gets too high, when the church talks about giving too much, or they're always asking you to serve, or I can't believe they want my small group to meet that often, or how dare they ask us to welcome new people, we start looking for better options. Now compare the church shopping mentality with the advice of Eugene Peterson, the guy who wrote the Message paraphrase of the Bible that he gave to a young adult who asked him, how do I find the right church? This is what he said. How do I find the right church? Go to the closest church where you live and the smallest. After 6 months, if it isn't working, go find the next smallest church. The young adult responded, why the smallest church? Eugene Peterson said, because you have to commit to the people. There's no escaping the people in a small church. You can't be anonymous. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say find the church that makes you feel good, to where you leave on Sunday morning feeling encouraged and uplifted. He didn't say find the church with the best preaching, or the music you connect to best, or coffee that you can at least tolerate. That one hits me particularly. He's saying find the people that you're willing to live with, those who you are willing to commit to. And I saw some of you look around when I said smallest church, and you're like, well, this isn't exactly a small church. Are you telling us we should leave? I'm not saying that at all. Please don't leave. I'll never get to preach here anymore. Peterson's point wasn't about church size, it was about commitment to people. It's about finding a way to really know the people who make up a church and then choosing to stick with them. And in a church like ours, where often we have 400 people or so gathered every week, that kind of connection doesn't happen on a Sunday morning. You can't connect and do exposure and encouragement in the lobby after church. It happens in smaller communities. It happens when you sign up for something like Rooted, where you sit down with 8 or 12 people who are trying to follow Jesus, and you commit to them, and you show up, and you share, and you serve, and you start living out the rhythms of biblical community together. That's where you find true belonging. That's where you find true community, but it starts with commitment. If you commit, you'll find community. But if you're only looking for community, you'll never get there, because it takes commitment. Community is always the byproduct of commitment. All right, final point. Closely related to that last one, community takes time and intentionality. It takes time and intentionality. There's no shortcut to what Jesus is building. There's no microwave version of this. It's not like a Hot Pocket. You can't throw it in the microwave and eat it a minute later. True community requires you to stay, to commit, to be willing to walk with a group of people over the long haul. It requires you to practice what St. Benedict called stability. Stability, the spiritual discipline to stay put, to get somewhere. Staying put so you can get somewhere. It's so counterintuitive to our culture. Here's what it looks like lived out. This is a vow taken by monks in Iowa joining a Benedictine monastery. This is what they promise. They say, we vow to remain all our life with our local community. We live together, pray together, work together, relax together. We live life together. We give up the temptation to move from place to place in search of an ideal situation. Ultimately, there is no escape from oneself. There's no escape from your shadow. The idea that things would be better someplace else is usually an illusion. And when interpersonal conflicts arise, as they always will in community, we have a great incentive to work things out and restore peace. So since we're not going anywhere, we have to make this work. This means learning the practices of love, acknowledging one's own offensive behavior, giving up one's preferences, forgiving. In other words, becoming more like Jesus. It's a beautiful vision of commitment and intentionality to community. So I'm going to throw a vow up here to Christ Community Church. If you'll just read the words for me and we'll be good. I'm kidding, okay? We're not taking vows. I'm not making you promise to stay here forever. I just want you to think about what sort of a person that sort of a commitment creates. Because I think that vow is actually the spirit of what Jesus invites us into. A covenantal way of life together with other followers of Jesus where we say, hey, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying. I'm going to love these people right where they're at as they are. I'm going to work it out when it gets hard. I'm going to grow here. And as I grow deep roots in this community, you will then start to grow fruits and you'll be formed by the people around you as they expose and they encourage and you bump into one another and you learn to live in love. From the West Coast, spent a lot of time up in Northern California, and there's a lot of incredible rivers on the West Coast coming through the mountains, and a lot of river rocks. You ever seen a river rock? They're smooth, but you know they don't start smooth, right? River rocks start just like any other rock. They're rough, they're jagged, they're sharp, but over time, as the river flows around it, the rocks bump into each other. Pieces chip off, and they hit other rocks, and they rub up against each other, and the sharp edges over time get filed down. That is what happens in a long-term commitment to community. As the river of life and of time flows around us, as we come up against our brothers and sisters, our edges are worn down. And what's left isn't just a prettier version of you, it's someone who looks more like Jesus than you did yesterday. So why do you need community? Because you were never meant to follow Jesus alone. Because transformation doesn't happen in isolation. Because the ache you feel when you're lonely is your design speaking. It's how you were created. It's not good for you to be alone. You were created for connection. You were formed for relationship. You were built to walk with others, not just so your life feels better, but so your heart becomes whole. So your character becomes like Christ, so your soul becomes rooted in love. We don't grow on our own. We don't heal on our own. We don't follow Jesus on our own. We do it together. So if you're here and you feel disconnected, if you've been holding community at arm's length or you've been shopping for church, the invitation is simple. Come close. Commit to a place for a season. See what God might do in you as you do life together with those around you. Would you join me in prayer?